Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to How to Make Change. I saw a lot of you yesterday at How to Make Sense, and I'm really excited to be back with this terrific trio of thinkers and activists. My name is Rachel Giese. I'm moderating the panel. And before I introduce the panelists, we've got a couple of folks in the audience who have those square mics. Can you introduce yourself and let people know where you are?
Xtra, I'm right here on this corner.
Okay, and over here?
I'm Scott Young. I'm the Director of Ideas and Insights.
Great. So we're going to start the conversation here on stage. Then we'll open it up to you all in the audience. So you can track down Yasser or track down Scott. Just wave at them and they will bring a mic over to you. Remember to hold it close to your mouth when you're talking. So I want to get right into it. Let me introduce, I'll start on my right, is Dave Meslin. He is the author of Teardown, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up. Across from me is Wente, a Ojibwe broadcaster, advocate, and pop culture philosopher. And then to my left is Nadya Tolokonnikova. She's an artist and political activist and one of the co-founders of Pussy Riot. We are at a critical moment in human history. Populism and nationalist and extremist movements are on the rise. We have deep fakes and disinformation being spread like viruses on social media. We have the continued growth and consolidation of power and wealth in the hands of the few. And of course, the backdrop of everything is climate change. Catastrophic weather events, displacement, illness, drought, flooding. But we've also seen, just even in the last few months, continued mass protests. We've seen pro-democracy demonstrations happening in Hong Kong. Last weekend and this upcoming weekend, there are climate strikes happening around the world. And what these mass protest movements and demonstrations are saying, and what so many are demanding at this moment, is a radical rethink and reordering of our political and economic systems. And I know that that is the thinking behind my guests here on stage, as well as many folks in the room. So I want to start with a go-around with the three of you. I want to talk a little bit about the disconnect between those folks out on the streets with a sense of urgency, saying change needs to happen now and it needs to be big change, and the rest of the world that is hanging on to the status quo or indifferent to the calls. I wonder if you could just reflect a bit on how you understand that disconnect or that gulf. Maybe Dave, I'll start with you. Sure.
First of all, let me say that for a middle-aged man who's balding at the back, this is a nightmare format. What always protects me is that I'm looking forward and no one can see, but what can I say? I'm turning 45 next week. I'm not sure there's a disconnect. I think everyone's talking about change. The question is, what does change look like? So you got the kids on the streets walking out of school. On Friday, huge climate strike happening, saying we want change. But you've also got Donald Trump saying, you want change, vote for me. All the populists talk about change as their main playing card. People who put themselves forward as candidates for the status quo aren't the ones winning elections. So everyone's talking about change. So what is change? And I think the work I've been trying to do is to promote an idea that change isn't about who's in power. It's about the shape of power. It's about our relationship to power. It's about the decentralizing opportunities to share power more amongst a larger group of people. We've almost reverted back to a medieval model, where in a country here, for example, of 30 million people, not only do we have a very non-participatory political culture, but even within the House of Commons, 338 MPs, we have a fake majority government that doesn't represent a majority. And then even within that party, total centralization in the hands of one man whose father held the same role. That's how we did it hundreds of years ago. It's called monarchy. Like we've really reverted back culturally and historically and devolved our democracy. So I think democracy needs a huge kick in the ass. It needs an enema. We need to say, wait a minute, what is going on? Is this even a functioning democracy? And I think if we came up with a list of indicators of what a healthy democracy would look and feel like, I don't think Canada would actually rank very well at all.
Yeah. Jesse, do you want to jump in on that one about Canada as a democracy?
Yeah, I mean, my view would be it's never been a functioning democracy, and I think monarchs is how some people used to do it. Monarchs are not how it used to be done where, for example, we sit today. And it wasn't that long ago that was true. I think in general, humans are frightened animals, and so there's a certain clinging to the status quo because it's comfortable, and you want to deny the inevitable, even though it's really sort of in your, you can see it. So I think people prefer the comfort of a denial, and then I think some people, the most affected, realize that you can't actually do that, and so you have to take some form of action, and I think that's what and I think you're seeing it on both sides, because I think yes, all politicians run on change. Virtually all politicians are status quo centrist politicians, certainly in Canada. I don't think we have a radical left or right, frankly, as much as we think we do in Canada. And so, I think the unfortunate thing is we're in an election where we are doomed to elect a status quo politician because that is what is on offer. I think increasingly, at least for Indigenous peoples, maybe we should just stop caring and just seize our sovereignty back and just say, we don't recognize your courts. We're not sure why you have any dominion over us. It's not a legal country. Because I don't know what the options are actually for us. Change within the system. I don't think it's a viable sort of thing. So, and I know I don't want to leap ahead in your questions, so I'll stop maybe there. But I put much less stock that this is worth fixing, and that we should, a lot of these systems are actually very immature, and I think what we see in places like Canada and the US is very immature countries, nations that really don't even have any grasp of themselves and are trying to navigate and unfortunately are trying to navigate waters they helped sail all of us into. And I think it's unfortunate that so many have to be put in a position by so few.
Yeah. Nadya, as someone who has been very much involved in grassroots direct action, what do you see as the distinction between the political activism you've been involved in and those who don't wish to engage or don't want to hear the case you're making?
First of all, I want to say that I'm really happy and emotional being here. I was in Canada first time in 2011. It was the place where I saw my intellectual and spiritual guru, Judith Butler, and I came to her talk in Toronto University. So being here and actually talking on stage, it's an interesting moment in my life because, thank you for coming and listening. Also, I've been thinking a lot about Canada when I was in prison because I was here, I didn't travel that much before prison, but I was in Canada just because I have some members of my family through my ex-husband living here. And I was thinking, obviously, like for someone who came from Russia, like you're all saying that it's not democracy. I believe it's not, but like for someone who's coming from Russia, it's still more democracy than Russia. And especially when you are in prison, you think about like, oh wow, like another world exists. So now I'm traveling much more, and I'm seeing like all pro and contras and pluses and minuses about these democracies too. But yeah, like when I was in prison, I thought like, whoa, fuck, like I really want my country to be a little bit more like that. So yeah, thank you for existing, guys. I mean, it was really interesting for me what you said about like not participating in the system, not participating in the current political system. I've been lately thinking the opposite because I think, at least in my country, we didn't want to participate for so long, so we lost any touch with current political system, and they felt like they can do whatever they want without us caring about it. But lately, we started to being really engaged in. We're trying to be really engaged in the processes that are going on right now, like local elections. And this summer was fucking fire in Moscow and all around Russia. Our local elections in Moscow city office became a federal issue. I mean, it became a global issue, like Guardian, Times, and other global newspapers wrote about it. And so we have this city parliament at like 45 places, and a number of independent candidates were trying to be elected. Instead, they were imprisoned, not for long, and one of the women who was trying to be elected, she ended up being on hunger strike for a month because she was denied her rights to be elected, and it caused mass protests in the middle of Moscow. And I feel like this attempt of being in the system and system reacting so badly and so nasty really energized people in Russia, and they feel like they actually can create change. So I see reasons why we should try to participate in politics, in like official politics.
I really appreciate that. I think for me, I think a lot of people in this room should be very engaged. For indigenous peoples on this land, though, to engage in a system that has made it pretty clear for its entire existence that it would rather we not exist, that it would be more convenient for us to go away for everyone else. For us, specifically for that, I'm not sure what we get out of it. I think if you would like us to participate, if that's sort of a goal, then there's a lot of shit that everyone else here actually has to sort of sort out. Because we had thriving nations for millennia before this one, and this one has not been a position of thriving for us. Quite the opposite. We have suffered so that much of the world can thrive. So I guess for my community, and I speak as someone who's engaged, my job nowadays is largely a political job. I spend most of my day talking to politicians, which is not great for your outlook on democracy. So like I work within the system. That's the way my positionality, because of my life, has put me that's the best way for me to do it. But I'm just not sure I don't think Canada has ever presented a cogent offer to Indigenous people of why we should give a shit and why we shouldn't just say, when we think about it, we're just going to take it back. And because there's large portions of this country that is imminently possible for us to just do it. Not Toronto's would be difficult, but, and I just don't know why, as sovereign nations on this land who never lost their sovereignty, why we wouldn't do that. And I think that's really the challenge for Canadians in Canada, is like, if you want your nation to be legitimate, you do sort of have to figure out how to want us to allow you to be legitimate. And that has never been the direction of this conversation. And just sitting in 2019 facing a climate crisis, I don't think our people should wait anymore. And, you know, I go up into my community or other communities, it's like, you know, why wait? Like, let's just start practicing sovereignty, and if Canada wants to go to war with it, you know, unfortunately, maybe that's what we have to do, because you know.
Just can I ask you, in terms of getting to that place, I'm wondering what you make of efforts to, say, indigenize particular systems, whether it's education or healthcare within the broader mainstream system. Do you think that those are useful steps towards sovereignty, or do you feel there's no point in putting the effort into indigenizing systems that are not created by Indigenous folks and held by Indigenous folks? Or do you see that that's a step towards sovereignty?
That's interesting. I would say in practice, I'm not sure indigenizing or decolonizing any has actually worked to this moment. Mostly because I don't think colonial systems actually have any desire to decolonize. So it's not to their advantage to do that. So why would they do that? Colonial systems have shown that they really want to do things for their advantage only, and so they tend to be very focused on themselves. Could it work? Theoretically, it could work. But again, I don't know if it is actually possible. You know, Indigenous people have, for example, been in the scholars have been in the academy for decades, and yet they would still tell you it's an extractionist, colonial, patriarchal institution, and we're 40 or 50 years in. And in the 70s, Indigenous scholars were asking, why do we put so much effort into a place that doesn't want us? We're 2019, I would suggest Indigenous people are still asking fundamentally that same question. I think what would be more interesting is if it's a pathway, because I'm not sure I would agree that decolonizing or indigenization is necessarily a pathway to sovereignty. I think you have to have that as your end goal and build organizations to do that. But I think you potentially you could do that, and I think we need to. Yeah, smarter people than me will hopefully be able to conquer that one.
Dave, I wanted to bring you into something that Nadya was talking about the question of, because I think it was so interesting, the idea of your experience in Russia and looking to countries like Canada and saying, well, there are things in our democracy and that you think have value, or at least you see are more open than aspects of...
Several things, at least. I think you will not be arrested immediately after you get out of your house. I mean, not as likely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what just happened with me 2 weeks ago. I wanted to make a photo shoot with a banner, Putin, go away. And it was literally a photo shoot. And my friends, including my sister, who was 17 years old, we were being arrested just when we were leaving our house, like for no fucking reason. But yeah, I'm pretty far from seeing things in black and white.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing like a lot of, troubles are here too.
Well, Dave, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, the corruption of systems. Democracy often has this sort of like, hey, let's democracy, and yet how democracy actually plays out is a very different thing. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about your work in terms of electoral reform and how that fits into a picture of improving the democratic institutions that we exist in.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if we just define democracy as, do we get the chance to put a ballot in a box, which is kind of how it's seen, then yeah, we have a democracy, great. So does North Korea. They have ballot boxes, but you only get one choice. One party wins every time. Here we have two parties that win every time. It's not that much better. I mean, it's 200% increase. But I would say here, we don't have to put oppositional, radical, marginal leaders in jail because we use a voting system that makes sure they don't win the seats they deserve. We electorally imprison ideas in Canada. So Russia has a proportional system with a 5% threshold, and 5% in Canada gets you nothing. So we end up with so many distorted outcomes. We literally have two parties who've traded power back and forth for 150 years. It's really boring. It's incredibly boring. I can't genuinely do any work that is designed to encourage young people to vote. I can't spiritually do it because the system is spiritually corrupt and it perpetuates a cartel of 2 or 3 parties who like it that way. And any healthy marketplace needs new ideas. It needs startups. It needs competition. And all the people who preach competition in the marketplace of money exercise anti-competition policies in the political marketplace. But let me talk for 1 second about the word tradition. So the theme of this is how do we make change? And obviously one of the enemies of change is tradition. And we're so married to the idea that the primary dominant aesthetic of our politics should be tradition. You know, the British model that we were given X years ago. And we do it with the way they speak in Parliament and the way it's designed and the rituals to an extent that we don't allow ourselves to imagine things being different. So what we can do is either let go of tradition and say, why don't we experiment a little bit? Or let me just add on to what Giese mentioned, which is that real tradition in this country isn't 150 years old. It's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years old. And I recently was introduced to this really amazing idea that the evolution of democracy isn't traced back to Greece and Athens, because there's a pretty big black hole in the middle of that linear story, which is the Dark Ages in Europe. And in fact, the idea is that the countries that really allegedly exploded with democracy a few hundred years ago were the ones that were exposed not to Greece, but to First Nations practices right here. So England and France were exposed to much more mature, sophisticated decision-making models, brought it back to their country while they were kicking the shit out of everyone here. And that the real traditions we should be looking back to is the Great Law of Peace or consensus models. And while the Great Law of Peace was being developed and nations were coming together here to form participatory models and to give rights, universal rights, prominent roles for women, in Europe they were literally doing the Crusades and building weapons of torture and burning witches. Yeah. So if we're going to be obsessed with tradition, let's go back a little further. But the tradition we're holding on to is immature. I mean, it's chronologically immature. Canada is a child chronologically, and we would have so much to learn. So I would love to see our political processes indigenized, not for the sake of the indigenous community, but for all of us. There's so much we could learn. But our current system is designed to deliver polarization, to keep elite voices in power, and then when they die, their sons, and it's all sons. 117 members of Parliament have sat in the House of Commons with their brothers. Not one has ever sat with their sister. We are obsessed with male hereditary lineage, and our voting system is an absolute disgrace and a joke. Mm-hmm. And if we're not prepared to experiment, we're sentencing ourselves to an eternity of painful elections just like this one is.
I just want to bring... do we have anybody from the audience who wants to leap in at this point? We've got the mic over here and the mic over there. Okay, Scott, you have somebody? Do you have anybody want to leap in?
Hello?
Yeah. Okay. Hi. Can you stand up?
Oh, yeah,
so
sure.
you?
My name is Gracia Dyer-Halea, and I'm curious to know about your thoughts around this concept of risk and the need for risk to make change, and risk defined as the potential for loss, harm, and damage. And in my work, I've found that those who take risk to make change are often those who need the status quo to change. But what does that mean if those folks are coming from more vulnerable experiences? And something that I'd like to put into this space, in this room of bright minds and decision makers, is what is your capacity for risk? And all of it should be different for everyone. And what does knowing that, how can that contribute to all the different ways that we're going to make change?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Nadia, can I ask you to answer that one? The question of risk, of how risk plays into this question of change, and whether from your own experience or what you've observed?
Can I ask you about your work? Like, what are you doing? You said it from your experience. I'm just curious.
Yeah, okay. So I'm working to create space for underrepresented voices to contribute to our larger understanding of Toronto, or Canada's history, actually. Yeah.
Risk. I mean, I don't know, lots of people think that we are courageous. I think like often we are just dumb, and like what makes us dumb is our like really passionate desire to create change, and we just look in the future, we have this carrot in front of us, our vision of the future, and it's so clear for us how it should be. So we don't really think about like all the troubles that we can run into while we are trying to make this future possible and doable. We just like we kind of jump from here to there, and then we are being caught on the way by some people like cops and riot police. I mean, like all sorts of evil creatures. I don't know. Like my life is more or less like fairy tale. Sometimes it's happy, sometimes it's not. But yeah, I feel like people who are really passionate about making change, they often see their lives as like cartoon creatures. So like I've been really influenced by Tom and Jerry. I have to say. all my childhood, I was watching that cartoon, and even if you're dead in this cartoon, like you may be sure that he will resurrect. So even if your face looks like, and like like an iron because it just fell down on your head, like in a second it will be normal. So that's my identity. That I picked my identity from Tom and Jerry, and I just don't think that I might be dead one day. It's just not in my possibilities.
I mean, I just am curious about your use of that. I'm not sure if you're entirely being serious when you use the word dumb, because that's.
I'm totally serious.
So do you think that when you started engaging in political protest, that you had to kind of turn off the part of your brain that understood that understood what the potential consequences were?
Yeah, I think it's almost clinical thing. Yeah, I just like when we started it, like we didn't have fear at all, and I remember.
So you didn't think I could wind up in jail, I could wind up silenced, I could wind up harmed, my family could be attacked. That, like, do you think that was a necessary condition for you to take the risk?
I mean, we just really wanted to make our voices heard, and we wanted to make our art, and it's like this thing. It just sounds kind of innocent to me. Like, we didn't want to kill anybody, we didn't want to steal anything, we didn't want to ruin anybody's life. So, like, nothing sinful was about to be done, right? So, and we exist in our own ethical system. As long as we are not making harm to humankind, like, why does humankind will make harm to us? And so, like, when you live within this universe, it's really easy to take risks because you're like, it should be fine. Like, I'm kind, I'm nice to people. Like, what wrong can happen? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, we just like, when you live within this community, within this activist community, you kind of turn yourself off from the world that may damage you.
Right.
So you don't think about those
Yeah.
risks. That makes you dumb in a way, but happy in another way, because you actually live in the future right now. You actually live in the best possible world right now, because you're surrounded by people who don't have fear.
I mean, to me, it sounds a bit almost like it's a form of resistance in and of itself. It's a refusal to participate in the norms set around you.
No fear.
Yeah, or what you're describing as, you know, I want to.
It's like altered state of mind.
Yeah.
But that's our way of being high and make change. I mean, that's not always easy. I'm not saying that I'm not scared. Like, I'm scared of so many things, and I will always have to work on managing my fear. But I'm just conscious about importance of this work, and that's been said, doesn't mean that I'm not struggling with tons of things, like including my own depression. That is my ongoing battle. But, you know, world didn't promise to be all the time happy, and
Thanks. I want to bring, I think there's someone else behind me, maybe, waiting to talk.
Hello. My name is Danelle, and I'm a student at the University of Toronto. I think that there's a real duality among young people right now. Like, on one hand, we're angry and we're pissed off, and you can see that on Friday, and you can see that last week. We're angry and we're afraid and we're passionate and all of these things that young people have been for so long. But on the other hand, we live in an age where we have to commodify ourselves, and we have to be professional, and we're always applying for things, and we have to present ourselves a certain way. So my question is, it's two parts. One is, how do we reconcile this duality of wanting to be passionate and angry and expressing all of these things, and also wanting to be professional and make sure that we're doing it in a way that's palatable and approachable? And then the second thing is, how do we bring that anger and that passion into our work?
Great, thank you. Does anyone want to, either one of you want to step into this one?
I have a question again. I'm sorry, I have a lot of questions. Like, what are you afraid of? Like, when you say that you're afraid of, what are your fears?
What am I afraid of?
Yeah, you said, like, we have...
I mean, Roe v. Wade dying in the US. I'm afraid of climate change.
Roe v. Wade, the abortion, protections for abortion rights?
Like reproductive rights, climate change, refugee crises, lots of things. Like all of these big global issues.
Got it.
Did you want to go first?
Go first.
So there's this spectrum of tactics within any movement. And what bothers me sometimes that I see a lot of judgment between the tactics. So you've always got people working on the inside, either as politicians, as part of the bureaucracy, political staff. Then you've got the big charities, then you've got the nonprofits, the grassroots groups, and the radicals yelling in the streets. And often the radicals are like, oh, those schmucks on the inside selling out. And the people on the inside are like, oh, those crazy radicals out there. I think any successful movement, if you traced it, you would find that all those parts were part of an advocacy ecosystem, and they depend on each other. And I think it's actually really important for younger people to be in the streets, because inevitably you will end up to some degree on the inside, whether it's as a journalist or as a nonprofit staffer or as a politician, and it's awkward for those people to go out in the streets and yell. So yell while you can, because there's professional restrictions that will slowly enter your life. I've been in jail, and I was in jail because I was at a radical protest at Queen's Park, where we were storming the barricades, and there were injuries, and people got hurt, and there was tear gas. I've been tear gassed in 3 countries. I can't do that now for a whole variety of, and it doesn't appeal to me now, but it needs to be done. So pace yourself. You'll have to professionalize at some point. I would say don't rush it. But also, in terms of the tone of your message, there are many ways to be respectful and radical and angry at the same time. Look at what's her name, Greta. She was pretty angry yesterday. She scolded the UN. And she just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more high profile, probably to a point that I'm worried about her mental health. She's so young. I worry about political leaders because we celebrify them and put them up on pedestals. That's a separate issue for another forum.
Why do you worry about her mental health but not yours?
Oh, I worry about mine. I worry about hers because I know about mine.
I just heard so much about like people worrying about her mental health, and
Yeah.
I'm just like, what? Why?
No, I worry about my friends.
I
I
mean,
worry
like,
about
worry-
yours. I worry about
Yeah,
all
like,
of ours.
worry about-
I do. But she's being so hyper-exposed at an age where I think it's difficult to even hang out with your friends in the schoolyard. So I do. I worry.
Billie Eilish does it, so
Yeah, we'll see. But my point was, you can be angry. Being an angry message is different than an angry delivery of that message. There are ways to deliver a sense of anger that will be accepted in the mainstream, and it's really fun to learn how to walk that tightrope.
I got a question just on that. I was hosting a panel a little while back at the Fold Festival, which is the Festival of Literary Diversity. It happens out in Brampton. It's amazing. And it was a panel about female anger, and it was a bunch of women writers talking about anger. There were a number of books that came out in the last little while about female anger. And one of the things that came up was if you are a person pressing for change in some way, particularly if you are a person who is marginalized or a targeted person in some way, there's also the anger coming back at you. And I'm just sort of curious about, this question, and I don't want to, I'm just curious about this question of how we bring anger forward, but also how do people who want to make change contend with very angry people, particularly in spaces like the internet and on social media, where there is waves of attacks, that there is a way to organize that anger in retaliation and in backlash.
I was just talking to my friend as I was writing a song at 6 a.m. in the morning today. So my problem was I have lots of friends who are using extreme vocal techniques, and mostly they have male voices. So I've been struggling with the fact that like when you have female voice and you scream, lots of people say that, oh, it doesn't sound like, it doesn't sound metal, it sounds like you're hysterical. And I'm angry about it. I want to scream and I have female voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's somebody back in the corner here somewhere. Yes?
Hello. Wanted to take a little bit of a different approach to making change. In the work that we do, I'm involved with Color of Poverty, Color of Change, the racial justice, education, and advocacy network in Ontario. And in our work of movement building, critical to that, right from day one when we launched about 12 years ago, was the critical need to make visible and bring light to bear on the growing nature of the inequities and disparities that are racialized or color-coded. A lot of those things that we don't like to talk about in Canada. But that was also in the context of our 9-year government previous to the current, which was involved in an exercise of decision-based evidence-making, not evidence-based decision-making. Classically illustrated by the throwing out of the mandatory long form of the long form census. Get rid of the information, get rid of the data. What are your thoughts on the need, as we try to cultivate and build a shared understanding, a shared awareness, and a shared analysis of what are the challenges that we face in helping to bring about change, the need to make those inequities and disparities much more visible, whether they be gender identity driven or sexuality driven, ethno-racially driven, peoples of color, indigenous peoples, et cetera, in all the ways, in those critical cleavages of our society. How do we make that much, or we believe that we should make that much more visible and create opportunities for that to happen in order to drive agendas of change?
It's a big one.
Anyone want to leap in?
Well, I don't know how you would solve inequities if they're not visible. And I think, of course, that's really important in a culture that prefers to obscure and hide and actually doesn't even sort of believe it's inequitable, right? It's the big trick of settler colonial nations is they say that they're all about equality when they're actually founded on inequality. So I think that's very true, but back to anger and risk, to connect them, like the people that do that put themselves at risk. Like a report is good, but sometimes people who actually speak those truths can be at risk. And in terms of anger, I'd actually have, in terms of your question about your career, I took a very different path, which was I was not nearly as angry as a young person. And I built my career and was quite conscious that there would be a moment in my career when that was when I would pivot and work for my community. And I would accrue as much influence as I could so that when I did that, I could deliver to them the most that I have to offer back to them. And that required an enormous amount of compromise with my own anger and my own, because you just sort of have to like, no, I'm going to suck it up in this colonial institution for the moment, and I'm going to build my career, I'm going to build my voice on the radio to the point where they couldn't take me off the air. Well, but that's, to be honest, that was, like I started as a film critic, reviewed fucking Disney movies, right? That's what I started my career as. I didn't talk politics. And then slowly over time in my criticism, you started to actually hear politics emerge. And the column became, I built my career to the point where for the CBC radio, you know, I'm the highest rated 5 minutes that the show has every week. And so they won't cut me. Like I can't figure out, now I'm in the position I can't figure out what to say to make them fire me. So it's a different, and now I make sure that I've done that to use that platform to actually, as best as I can, help and to advocate for change. And building my career is what allows me to sit in politicians' office and use that voice in those venues as well. And so but I can't say it doesn't take a piece of your soul on the journey to do that. And I think to your point, we actually need both, because we need some to be in the streets and we need some to be in the legislature. And we do all meet in the middle. And I agree that, you know, lobbing grenades around tactics, bad analogy. Lobbing snowballs around tactics is not always that helpful, but we also should not be held without criticism, you know, and so, yeah, and I would also say Indigenous people here, I think, have a unique advantage when it comes to doing this work, in that we're already a post-apocalyptic people. We live in The Walking Dead right now, which, you know, think about that for a second and you worry about your own self. But like, so the idea that this could all collapse, you know, it's like yeah, it's frightening on a personal level maybe, or you know, because I have a family and you know, and all that jazz. But it's not like this doesn't happen. It's not like this is exactly the cycle of human civilization, especially in, you know, well, globally, Indigenous cultures rose and fell as well. So, you know, I think the challenge is to truly try to vision what we want in the end, right? Because the reality is this system will fail. And so what is it that we want to imagine at the end? And I think risk is all about positionality. Because is change risky for a First Nations kid who doesn't have drinking water in Northern Ontario? When it's risky for them to drink the water out of the tap. What's risk for them? It's very different than the risk for the people in this room. And so I think we need to always understand that risk is one of perception, and that what one person finds risky is actually them protecting what's comfortable, and what other people find risky is actually a life and death thing.
We've got about 30 minutes left, so I want to start moving us a bit towards some examples and tactics, and so I'm going to get back to the audience in just a sec. But I just want to ask the panelists on the stage about the question of, which is sort of, I think, kind of underneath this, and it's a conversation I had with Dave the other night about incrementalism, small changes versus tear the whole thing down. And, how do we hold both of those? Are those visions, or are those ways of working at odds with one another? Or are they complementary? Small changes, small steps alongside foundational change, revolutionary change. Mm-hmm. I'll start with you, Nadya.
Yeah. I have a lot of anger towards any binaries. I don't believe in choices between A and B. I don't believe in a choice between local and global, because, I'm from anti-fascist movement who's been always, like, for decades saying, think globally, act locally. And I think it's even more truth that it has ever been today, because you have access to internet, and you are your own institution, or at least if you have, if you can build it. Like what you said, like you had to go to institution to be accepted. I think it's not necessary anymore nowadays. Yeah, for young people, it's like, just start your YouTube vlog and you will be heard, likely. And so you can act within your own community. You can act with, you don't have to move to a big city. You can live in your village and report on things that you and your fellows are doing in this village, and it will be heard. It will be translated in many languages, and it may impact the way how people live in Russia, right? So the same thing, I don't believe in a choice between being in parliament versus being on the street, because we've been talking a little bit about AOC when we were sitting there before this panel, and that's my biggest question. Where are AOCs of the world? Because like she's a perfect combination of both. Like she's on the street, she's angry, she's a woman, she's screaming, but she's being heard, and she's in a high position of power. And I've been asking, like, where, like, do you have your local AOC here? And I've been told no, and I'm always curious, where are they? Mm-hmm. We have our own in Russia. Her name is Lyubov Sobol, and she's one of those candidates who were trying to be elected in Moscow city parliament, and she was on hunger strike for 30 days. And from being a lawyer and anti-corruption activist, she became one of the biggest politicians in Russia, though she was never been elected, because we have crooks in power, it's true, but yeah.
Thanks. Jesse?
Well, I think our system really makes it, this system that exists here makes it very hard for an AOC to exist in Canada. I also think Nadya's right, I am old. I think I'm the elder on the stage, in fact.
I don't think that's exactly what Nadya was saying.
But you're right in that you don't have to.
Right.
When I was a kid, when I was a young person, there was no internet. That is how old I am.
I'm not saying that you're old, but I'm just I'm cautious about people.
It's okay. I feel attacked. It's fine.
Like when you talk about your experience, I think like people who are 11 years old today, they should understand that they don't have to follow your steps.
No,
exactly.
it's very true, and so please keep that in mind. What was the original question?
I guess the relationship between incrementalism,
Yes.
small change, and burn the whole thing down.
So, first of all, for me personally, as much as I talk about dismantling the state and things like that, I'm actually far more interested in building up indigenous systems, and because the crumbling of the state is sort of going to take care of itself. So I think we have to just make sure that we're building up as much as we can so that we understand our existence afterwards. And, you know, when it comes to that point, one of my greatest mentors was a woman named Alanisa Bomsawin, who's a very famous filmmaker here in Canada. And, you know, I've known Alanise for, never mind, like a long time now.
We know you're old.
I'm old.
You said it.
She's older. She's older. She's 80 and just directed her 53rd movie. Anyway, 87 and 53rd movie this year. She told me, she's always told me when it comes to this, she said, always be sure you acknowledge the incremental steps, because if you don't see the progress, you know, it makes the big leaps much harder, and that each big leap is the result of being able to get a running start with all those steps. And so she's always reminding me that, you know, things have changed, look how, you know, acknowledge these things are moving, don't get too stuck in trying to think that it all has to change overnight, and that to keep moving. And she's a great teacher around, you know, what is our role on this planet in our time? And she would not use this analogy, but I will, a football one, of just like move the ball a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm a big believer in just doing and believing whatever Alanise tells me to, and so.
It sounds like a good way to proceed, yeah. Dave, I'll go to you, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience.
Yeah, so I think it's a total false dichotomy, because all change, all sensible, long-lasting change happens incrementally. Ideas that decades ago were very radical, you know, women's rights, LGBT rights, civil rights movement, none of those happened with the revolution. They happened not only slowly, but painfully slowly. Painful, tiny, incremental steps. So to me, my measure isn't, do you believe in incrementalism versus revolution? It's not how quickly do you think it should happen, but where do you think we should end up? That's the measure. And my book is called Teardown. So obviously I have a certain idea of where we should end up, and I think I can imagine a political culture that is unrecognizable from what we have today. In the same way we look back at hairstyles from the 80s or fashion, I could see people looking back and just laughing that we thought we lived in a democracy, that question period was something that wasn't seen as professional theater. It was regarded as some high form of decision making, when really it's a kindergarten. It's a mockery of what we're capable of as species. It's an embarrassment to all of us that 338 grown adults yell at each other in this building all year. We should be outraged. But in the introduction of my book, I talk about how the word teardown comes in 3 flavors. You've got teardown in the context of real estate, where you buy a house and you tear it down. Not that I can ever dream of buying one of these houses in Toronto, but I've heard people do that. And then they tear them down. There's another kind of teardown, like an engine teardown, which isn't with a wrecking ball or a sledgehammer. It's a very slow and meticulous dismantling of every bolt and pulley and belt in the engine to clean it all, replace any parts that are damaged, and put it back together so it runs more smoothly. And there's a third teardown in the tech sector, where if a new iPhone comes out and you have all these geeks who want to know what's in it, they don't all have to buy one and take it apart. Someone will buy one, do a teardown, a product teardown and lay it out on a white piece of paper, every chip, wire, cable, and they take a photo, and then everyone can see what's inside it. It's a huge thing. It's like tech porn, these inside look into an iPhone. So what I do in the book is I say, our system is totally corrupt in so many ways. Lobbying, campaign finance, even the way our education system, I think, breeds kids to be followers rather than leaders. I look at the way we've totally dismantled local democracy, which is the most important level of democracy. And we don't have local democracy anymore. It doesn't exist. And then I go through those 3 flavors of teardowns. And in some cases, we just need to look at the nuts and bolts. What is campaign finance? What are the different reforms we can look at? New York City has a great model. Seattle has an even better model. But in some cases, some of our system design elements are so stupid that they just need a sledgehammer. And we need to start swinging that sledgehammer at parts of our system because there's no time to waste.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to open up to the audience now. We've got about 20 or so minutes. And so I know a few folks have been waiting behind me. And I'd also ask for the panelists and folks in the audience to start thinking tactically with these remaining minutes we have. So if you have stories of how you have made change, if you have tactics, if there are things that aren't working that we should stop doing, that would be great to hear as well. So I know there was somebody waiting behind me somewhere. Yeah.
Stand up. Hi.
Yeah, stand up.
Good afternoon. My name is Femi Abiola. I'm a student at Havergal College. I was going to say this earlier, but I only just got the courage to get my hand to stop shaking to put it up. Okay. So I've noticed that in some systems, some countries, that they're not as open to criticism. Like America, for example, whenever you discuss something that, for example, when racism was such an ingrained part of American society, when people are protesting that, they think you're protesting America itself. They think you're anti-American. You're not part of our society. You're not a true American and things like that. So how do we make it that more societies or more people are open to the criticism of a country in order to improve it for everyone, not just a certain group of people, instead of just thinking that, oh, you're anti this place, you're not one of us.
Thank you for your question. Anybody want to jump in on this one?
Is it a thing to accuse activists here to be anti-Canadian?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Is it a thing to accuse activists here to be anti-Canadian?
I think if you try and talk about racism, for example, it really rubs people the wrong way because a lot of us were raised in this idea that Canada's so special because everyone's equal. Mm-hmm. And then when you start getting older and you start realizing, wait a minute, I'm seeing evidence that everyone isn't having a shared lived experience. It's impossible to introduce the idea of privilege, for example, if you're talking to someone who's so proud of the fact that we've overcome, we're like post-racism, which is a beautiful idea. And that's how I was raised. I was taught that Canada's amazing because it's this melting pot and we're all here and everyone's equal. So people get really offended. It's absolutely seen as anti-Canadian to suggest the existence of inequality.
But I think you touched on it right there, which is the reason that happens is, as we said earlier, these settler colonial nation states are infants. And if you think of how a child reacts to criticism versus, I would say an adult, but look at how the President of the United States reacts to criticism, and I think actually children have a thicker skin than he does. But your reactions are immature. You're like, I don't want to, my daughter, 12 years old, if I say something, it's, the door is slammed, it's not the most, I'm just trying to help, but sometimes little kids don't want to hear from the older folks that they're not, doing it, they want to do it themselves. As a parent, that's part of getting them to be adults. And so when I think of nations, how do we help a baby nation mature and sort of actually have the adult conversations? Because the reality is these states don't actually have the adult conversations. They avoid them at all costs. They don't talk about really they pretend to talk about the economy, but nothing that they talk about is actually the adult conversation of that subject. It's all infantile sort of approach to it. So some of it is time, but some of it is also you have agency as a young person to, as you grow, to actually help influence. I always say it starts, your home, radiates to your neighborhood, your community, because people, the thing with systems, is that when we talk about them like we just landed here, or they were here. All of this shit is stuff humans made, right? And so when we get frustrated the optimistic part of it is that humans made this flawed thing. Humans can think how to make something different, or like we are confounded by problems of our own creation, right? And we're a species that thinks our brain, to speak to, I agree, we're dumb. But our mind is sophisticated enough to play tricks on us, so we build all this stuff as monuments to our genius, when actually they're all monuments to our weakness. This is like, do you think the wolf is really that worried about? No. The wolf is just the wolf. It never questions whether it's the wolf. It's there, it's doing its thing. It lives, like, we're the ones all angst-ridden. So who's smarter? Who's the more sophisticated animal? Who's actually figured out their place? They have. We could learn a lot if we were actually humble in the face of the real system of this place, which is the land. That's the only system that actually is not, we don't create it, we don't have dominion over it, we got nothing. Mm-hmm. That's the only system that actually encloses us. And unfortunately, that's the one system that we are trying our damnedest to rip apart.
I've got someone over here, and I've also been prompted, we're moving into the lightning round portion of this conversation, so we want to keep it
the
tight.
Scores can really change.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Mary Lou Harrison, and in terms of tactics, I would just like to advocate for anger as a tactic, especially, and not self-righteous anger, but anger that's deeply rooted in love. Love for people, love for planet, love for inclusion, this kind of love. And especially when it's unexpected. So this can be an incremental bit of anger if it's not your thing, or it can be really full-on rage if that is your thing. It is useful. I had, in challenging the position of women in leadership in a service organization to which I belong, I had someone come to me and say, Mary Lou, I heard you were angry. I've never seen you angry. I said, oh, well, let me tell you what I was angry about. And I told him, and he said, but I've never witnessed this from you before. I said, are you listening to me now? I am, he said.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ashwarya. I'm from Humber, and I want to ask a simple thing. How do I make a change where I am? How do I start to make a change at my school? I've been in Canada for 2 weeks, and I'm hesitant to talk to people from different backgrounds, and that's a small thing. I met someone who's been discriminated against at my school for wearing tribal jewelry. I just want to be able to create a space like 6 Degrees where people can come together and just talk and engage, like how I felt welcomed and warm over here to talk about things and talk to so many people. I want to be able to create that safe space where students can come together and just be normally talking about issues and things that they face as newcomers or as people from different backgrounds. How do I do that?
Does someone from the stage or someone from the audience want to jump in? Oh, there's someone right there who raised their hand.
I just want to say that the place where we have the most fruitful activist discussions is police car or police station. So I don't know if my experience might be useful for you.
Please go
I
ahead.
just want to add to a couple of things. She mentioned duality, and then somebody mentioned taking risks, and then sorry. No, go Oh, okay. And I was earlier having a discussion with Pambo where she mentioned Christopher Nolan. So I like to mention the scene where Batman is trying to get out of the well, and he gets rid of the rope he was holding on to. That's the risk that you're supposed to take. Get rid of the rope, and then you jump. That's the only way to get out of the well. So if that kind of answers your question, this is something that I've been, over the last day, I've been trying to come here and trying to find the answers. How do we make the change? Initially, till right now, I thought it was all talk. You're supposed to be that change. I mean, that's my takeaway from here. Yeah.
I love that we had a Batman analogy.
Well, I thought, too, your background reviewing films could come right into this.
I mean, it's interesting to take solace in like a really angry white billionaire who, instead of spreading his wealth, decides to beat the shit out of people in the street. But sure. To your point, work with the willing, ignore the unwilling. They will sort themselves out later. So really do find, this was great advice I had from a very senior Indigenous advocate who said, find the people who are actually going to help you. When you find someone who's not going to help you, cease putting any energy, just like, fine, boom, gone, move on to the next, build your coalition, right, of people. That actually becomes your safe space to then start building and create something like this if this is what you want or how to. So in terms of actually finding those people, I mean, Tim Hortons, but, just start the conversation and, you're going to find out pretty quick who's willing and who's there with you. And that's who's going to be not your ally, your accomplice, because allies are nice, but what we really need is accomplices.
Great. Thank you. Ryan?
Hi, good afternoon. I want to thank all the panelists for their insight and their good words here today. We've sort of touched on something that I think is really essential to change, and especially in the moment we're in now, but I'd like you all to speak a little bit more to it, and that is the role that mentorship plays in change making. Jesse, you brought up a mentor, and I think that we have burdened youth with so many projects. Y'all have to save the planet, our democracy, the housing crisis, meth. It's all on you. It's all on you. And the rest of us that are old get to go fucking figure it out. You got ideas. And that's not fair. And it's bullshit. And I am really inspired by young people. I'm inspired by what is going to happen tomorrow. But I also want to recognize that I'm in a position where I can be a mentor and I can help. And so I want to offer my hand in that way. But I also want you to speak about the role of mentorship in change making and in movement building. Miigwech.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And before I let the panelists go around, this will be the last point. We've got to wrap up. But the next session is what's next. So there's more opportunity for people to engage in the conversation. So don't worry, we've got you. We are creating space for you coming up. So I want to do a quick go around to wrap this on that question of mentorship and how we engage. So maybe I'll start with you, Nadya.
Yeah. I don't have a universal answer. I think everybody's different, but I found out that for myself the most fruitful way of being a mentor is not being a mentor, because I hate to preach. I hate to teach people how to live, and I found that for myself the best thing I can do just to be myself and live my life and be on the edge, risking, being an activist and trying to live within my views and values, and then people can follow or say fuck it, and it's been really fruitful. Strangely, I felt lately, like in the last few years, like, I don't know if you have this anecdote or expression, that you should sit on the riverbank and wait until your enemies' corpses will pass. So like that, like we Russians really known for black humor. So I was growing up on Tom and Jerry and on this anecdote. And so that's how I felt in the last few years, because Russia has changed so much, and like all of a sudden, without me trying to really actively change people or preach or that do any of that, like people just started to be really politically active, and somehow among young people, like really young people, like I'm talking about 13, 14 years old kids, like Pussy Riot became a thing. And I'm like, how on earth? Like I didn't even try to reach out to you like that often, but an ex-prison boss of my prison where I spent my time, like I was protesting against him. I started a hunger strike against him because he made women around me work for 16 hours a day. So he ended up in jail. All of a sudden, after 5 years, like I stopped thinking about him like 5 years ago, and all of a sudden it happened. So I just found out that living is the best thing you can do.
Thank you. Jesse, you were talking about being mentored yourself, and so I'm curious about your relationship to mentor.
Yeah, I've had so many brilliant mentors, and I still do. Just this week, I had to have my circle help me through a major decision, and I felt so blessed that they were there. And I've done both. Like I've done where you're the formal mentor, and I'm not sure that has been as great a fit for me. There's people that I would say I mentor all the time, and I would say do it. There's folks that we haven't spelled out the relationship, but we talk all the time, and it's an exchange. And they're usually a little bit younger than me, and they're finding their way. And then I would also say for me, that's how I've approached being a manager as much as I could in business. So when I worked at TIFF, I tried as best as I could to mentor a lot of my staff, and certainly at the ISO now, I'm trying with the folks that work with me now to mentor them, because I think it's, how do we build capacity? How do we get all of those experiences, especially when you have privilege? And how do you try to, it's so hard to gift. I mean, privileged people gift it to their children all the time, but when you're trying to gift it to someone, to your community, it's a bit more challenging, but I think mentorship is one of the ways where you try to take the experiences you've been privileged to have and extend those to other people so that, so I'm a huge believer, and I think we need to do it casually, formally, in all the different ways, and we should also seek out. I think it can be challenging to ask for help because it's an ego thing, but we should ask for help, and especially if you're a leader, you should ask for help all the time, because you should admit that you don't know everything and that you need that help.
Yeah. Quickly with you, Dave, about this question of mentorship, or even, I know there were earlier panel today on allyship and thinking about the young folks that are, say, whether they're taking to the streets this weekend. How do folks support them, mentor them, have their back?
Yeah. Well, let me respond first to this question from over here. Political organizing, or any kind of organizing, is so much fun. And there are so many people out there who would love to join you in whatever fight or battle or campaign you're imagining. But it requires a certain leadership action to be the person to say, hey, we're going to be meeting at this room at this time, and this is the name of the event. People will show up to that, but they might not have the confidence or the skill set to actually book the room. And yes, you're a generation growing up with the internet, which I didn't. And as much as you have all these great social media tools, let me tell you that even today, it's so important for people to meet face-to-face in a room. You will not make change with some kind of wiki or Snapchat group. Use social media tools to build the lists of supporters, to attract people to a hashtag for the sole purpose of getting them into a room like this and then meeting them face to face. I can see you nodding. I can see people smiling. You don't have that online. You don't have the body language. You can't build trust between comrades online. Get people into rooms. And the first step is to learn the administrative rules on your campus of how do you book a room. So it becomes a bit of a bureaucratic exercise, but book the rooms, register a group, announce a meeting, people will come, and then you can make a lot of difference. One word of warning, and we talked a bit about mental health earlier, burnout is a big issue in the activist community. People will try and celebrify you and put you on a pedestal and make you a hero, because that's what we do. You have to fight against that and always make it about the collective group. And the one last thing I want to say is, let's not just focus on how we make change, but what we're trying to change. So we're all going to be really distracted over the next few weeks about who's going to be the prime minister and which party is going to win. It's a distraction. How many of you subscribe to Netflix? Hands up. How many of you would subscribe to Netflix if there were only 2 movies you can watch, and they never changed, they were in black and white, and it was the same movies your grandparents watched? That's what's happening in October. Okay? So if we want to see a political culture that isn't polarized, people fighting instead of people talking, if we want to see a political culture that is inclusive and decentralized instead of a centralized system that elevates the voices of the elite and the wealthy, if you want to see a voting system that actually allows new voices to emerge where you know that every voice counts, then sure, spend the next few weeks working for a party and caring about who wins. But as soon as that's over, join movements that are fighting for systemic change, because a system that's designed to polarize, designed to centralize power, and designed to disempower all of us, and designed to fail, will fail. It's failing because we perpetuate a system that we have outgrown. Let's evolve as a species, let's drop the tradition and create a political system that actually works.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Nadya.